It's a Monday in the offseason, which means we are opening up the mailbag, answering your Orioles questions about how the O's can add to this team this offseason. That's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, October 23rd, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we are opening up the mailbag. Got 6 Orioles questions, all from you, the listeners, to answer on today's podcast. We're going to talk about things like what the Orioles will do this offseason to try and acquire a starting pitcher, how things will change maybe in the trade landscape because of some changes in other front offices. We'll talk a bit about the Orioles payroll and a little bit about what other moves could be made outside of starting pitching. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper picks, and you could win up to 100 times your money. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code Locked On, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. So it's a mailbag episode here of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Thank you all for submitting your mailbag questions. And again, the plan is for the offseason, for not every single Monday episode, but for most Monday episodes throughout the offseason, we're going to dive into the mailbag. So if you did submit a mailbag question and it is not answered on today's episode, don't worry. Got a stockpile of the mailbag questions. You can, though, continue to send in those questions by leaving them in the comment section right here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe as well. You can email us, lockedonorioles@gmail.com is the email there to send in the questions, or you can tweet the questions or DM the account at Locked On Orioles on Twitter to get in those mailbag questions. So let's jump right into it. First question of the day comes from actually about 5 or 6 different people asked a very similar version of this question. Basically, are the Orioles more likely to acquire a starting pitcher this offseason via trade or free agency? And some of the questions that were asked in this vein specifically said, a top flight starting pitcher, and that is how I am going to answer this. Because if you answer it as any starting pitcher, it's really tough to say that, because I do think even if the Orioles don't spend money, they'll probably try to sign at least a lower level starter, which we'll get to in a bit in the Kyle Gibson, Jordan Lyles kind of mold. But if they're looking for a top end guy, I think it's more likely to happen via trade. Now you look at the starters that Mike Elias has acquired for this team so far, basically since they've been trying to somewhat win. 2 have been via free agency, Jordan Lyles and Kyle Gibson, and 2 have been via trade, Cole Irvin and Jack Flaherty. Those are the 4 starters that the O's have acquired to try and help this team. What I have heard and what's been shown via the Orioles' workings in free agency the last couple of off seasons, the Orioles are not willing to give a starting pitcher more than a 3-year deal in free agency. And quite frankly, it sounded like most of the offers that the Orioles had out there last offseason were in the, 2 years, $35 to $40 million range. And it seemed like they were maybe likely or willing, is probably the better word, to give out a 3-year deal. But a lot of these pitchers are asking for more. And we know Aaron Nola turned down 5 years, $125 million as an extension from the Phillies, which means he's looking for 6 or 7 years, $150 million or more. The Orioles just aren't going to pay that. Jordan Montgomery is a guy who could probably look for 5-6 years and over $100 million, especially with how well he's pitched for the Rangers this postseason. Blake Snell's certainly going to ask for more than that. Sonny Gray was good enough to ask for close to that number. Those are the top starting pitchers on the market this offseason. I don't think the O's are going to be spending in that range, which means kind of by default, the answer is they're more likely to get a top flight starter via trade. Then when you add in the fact that, okay, they're not willing to spend, but they do have still arguably the best system in baseball, and just they are overcrowded with hitting prospects, and they all can't play at the major league level, it just makes more sense to do it via trade. And they have done the smaller ones with Jack Flaherty and Cole Irvin, and they've given up some legitimate prospects. Certainly, none of their top 10 prospects, but legitimate guys who could be major league players in those two trades with St. Louis and with Oakland. But now is the time to take that next step forward. Dig into your top 10 prospects and make the move to go get a guy, because whether it's Corbin Burnes or Dylan Cease or whomever out there, the Orioles have the prospect depth to go get one of those guys. If a team wants hitting prospects, and that's one of the caveats, if a team's really looking for pitching prospects, it's tougher because the Orioles are not nearly as deep there. But if a team is looking for hitting prospects, the first team they should go to is the Orioles if they're trying to trade away a legitimate starting pitcher. So the O's have that going for them. They should be able to make one of these deals, and it's just much more likely that they do it via trade. Second question comes from Jake on Twitter, who asks, do you think the Orioles will continue to sign a kind of veteran starting pitcher on a one-year deal? And I assume he means kind of the innings-eating variety. And if so, who will they sign this year? Who will be this year's version of Kyle Gibson? So we know the Orioles have done it back-to-back years. One-year deal for Jordan Lyles for 2022. He became the innings eater. One-year deal for Kyle Gibson in 2023 also was the innings eater. Now, both of those guys were fine. They pitched a lot of innings. They provided veteran leadership. Neither of them were great. And we know the Orioles declined the team option on Jordan Lyles last year. I don't think it's likely the Orioles bring back Kyle Gibson for 2024, but I do think it is likely they will look for another slight upgrade. I felt like Gibson was a slight upgrade over Lyles. I think they'll at least look for another slight upgrade over Gibson to get a veteran starting pitcher in here to eat innings, provide depth for 2024 on probably a one-year deal, because as we know, with the Orioles not super willing to go beyond 3 years for a free agent starting pitcher and generally not willing to go past 2, you are looking at a team that's going to try to find value on the margins in these one-year deals. Now, I would hope that maybe this year they're willing to give out more than $10 million on a one-year deal. And if you can wade into the $15 to $20 million on a one-year contract, you can get a much better starter on a one-year deal. I just don't know if it's going to happen this year. Now, there are a good chunk of starting pitchers out there available in free agency this offseason who I could see signing one-year contracts, but some of these guys also have to fit into the you want them to eat innings, because that has been the goal for Lyles and for Gibson. You have a very, very young staff alongside those guys, and you don't know how many innings you can get out of a lot of these young pitchers. So even if you bring in a guy like Lyles or Gibson who doesn't have a super high upside, he is there to know, hey, we're going to send him out there every fifth day, and at the very least, he's going to give us 5 okay innings, and sometimes he'll pitch better, and even if he's pitching poorly, he'll be able to at least give you like 4 innings of bad baseball to somewhat save the bullpen. Some of these younger guys, you need to take them out in the second if it's really not going well. Yes, that's a very low bar to clear, but that's been somewhat of the idea for Gibson and Lyles the last 2 years. Now, in terms of some of the one-year guys, I could see like a Michael Lorenzen type signing a deal like that, but he's never thrown close to 200 innings. He's been a reliever for some time of his big league career. He's not your innings eater. Kenta Maeda is in that group. I wouldn't call him an innings eater now because he's been kind of a swingman recently. He's had multiple injury issues. You can't count on him for 190 innings. James Paxton is a veteran guy who would probably get a one-year deal. He's coming off multiple injuries over the past couple of seasons. I don't think you can count on him for 180 innings. And then a guy like Luis Severino, maybe teeters on the brink, but still coming off some injuries, and he was terrible in 2023. Severino would be a guy who'd try to sign to get a cheap bounce-back candidate for 2024, but that's a bounce-back candidate is not the guy you want to rely on to be your innings eater. So that, to me, unless you want to bring back Kyle Gibson, who, surprisingly enough, if you take out Shohei Ohtani, who will not be a pitcher in 2024 because he's getting Tommy John, he's just going to be a hitter. Among the free agent starting pitchers this offseason, Kyle Gibson had the 6th highest Fangraphs WAR of all the free agent starting pitchers. That's kind of a wild statistic right there. So maybe it's not the worst idea in the world to bring back Kyle Gibson, but if they don't, I kind of have 2 names here. And again, there's still huge question marks in terms of can they eat innings. Number 1 is Hyun-jin Ryu. He's coming off of arm surgery. Now, he came back and he pitched okay down the stretch for the Blue Jays, and he's a veteran who's pitched innings before. I still don't think he's an innings eater. Really, the last guy out there who could eat innings for you is Martin Perez. He ate innings and pitched very well in 2022 for the Rangers. They re-signed him for 2023. They thought they'd get the same thing out of him, and they didn't. And Perez was basically moved into the bullpen halfway through the season, became a long reliever, a mop-up guy, a swingman, and he's not going to reach near that 200 innings this year. And he's basically only pitched in mop-up duty in the postseason so far for the Rangers. So that's not a guy you really want to count on. If you look at the free agent class this offseason, it is not ripe with those guys where you say, hey, you know what? He'll give us solid contribution and we know he'll pitch 180 plus innings. There's not that many guys out there, which is why after answering this question, I wouldn't be stunned if the Orioles try to bring back Kyle Gibson for another season, at least to be some depth for this younger rotation. Now, it can't be the only move they make. We certainly know that, but it could be a supplemental move this offseason. 4 more questions to get to here on this mailbag episode. Coming up next, we will talk a bit more about what the Orioles could do if they traded for starting pitcher instead of signing it in free agency. And then we'll also talk a little bit more about trades and how other front offices and the changes going on there could impact the Orioles' chances of getting a starter on the trade market. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by DoorDash. Did you wake up this morning and realize you were missing the syrup for your pancakes, or you just ran out of your favorite coffee creamer? Well, with DoorDash grocery delivery, you can get what you want right when you need it. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get grocery delivery that actually delivers too. They've got thousands of grocery stores to choose from, and you'll find the best in your neighborhood and boost your local economy with each and every order. And there's easy substitutions right in the app, best-in-class customer support. DoorDash delivers groceries exactly how you want it. And you can get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to a $20 value when you use code LOCKEDONMLB at checkout. It's a limited time offer and terms apply. That's 50% off up to $20, no minimum subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKEDONMLB. Don't forget, that's code LOCKEDONMLB for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. So we're back here on a Mailbag Monday episode of the podcast. Got 4 more Orioles questions to get to here on the pod, all from you, the listeners. Our third question of the day comes from Cal on Twitter, who asks, if the Orioles trade for a starter and are giving up top prospects, you would assume they're looking for a guy who's going to be one of their top of the rotation guys. Would you rather get someone like Corbin Burnes, who has a better track record, has won a Cy Young, has been an ace, but is only 1-year deal. You know, he's got 1 more year till he hits free agency. Or would you go after a guy with upside, with much more team control, but much less of a track record, like a guy like Brady Singer from the Kansas City Royals? It's a really good question from Cal. And there's other guys who fall into these categories, like Shane Bieber kind of falls more into the Burnes category. Dylan Cease probably falls more into the Burnes category. He's got 2 years remaining, versus like a young guy like Edward Cabrera from the Marlins also falls into more of the Brady Singer category. But I think this is really interesting, a question to answer, because I do think that Brady Singer is due for a bounce back. Brady Singer finished 2022 on an absolute heater down the stretch for the Royals. He was incredible basically the last 2 months of that season. He looked like the future ace of the Royals staff, and they traded him like that heading into 2023. They had a lot of expectations for Singer, and I don't know if he was injured the whole year or what it was, but Brady Singer was just a disaster in 2023, and he did miss some time, but in general, he was just not effective. Now, he did figure it out a little bit, basically over like the final month or so of the season. It wasn't anything close to what we saw in 22, but he figured it out a little bit again. But generally, it was kind of a disastrous season for Singer. Now, Brady Singer is a guy who's, I think, got 4 and maybe even 5 years of team control left. So that's what you're comparing here. Do you want Corbin Burnes, who he didn't have a down year in 2023 because he was still awesome, but he was not Cy Young Corbin Burnes this year. He took a little step back. Would you rather have that guy, who you know his track record, but he did take a little step back for 1 year? Or would you rather have Brady Singer, who's had 1 really good year, 1 not so good year, a lot more upside maybe, and 4 more years of team control? I do believe in Brady Singer. I think if the O's went and got him, he could be a huge piece for them for years to come. But if the Orioles had won 87 games this year, right, and snuck into the wild card and then got swept out of the playoffs, maybe my answer would be more so Brady Singer, because I would say, you know what? Who knows how much better the O's will get in 24. If you get Brady Singer for 5 more years, you can keep building him up, keep getting him better, and he'll keep being with these O's teams as they get better and better and ready to compete for a World Series. But the fact that the Orioles won 101 games and won the AL East says to me, go for it in 2024. You've got most of this roster coming back for next year that just won maybe the best division in baseball and won over 100 games, got you the number 1 seed in the American League. You're bringing back basically the entire roster that just did that. Go for it. Improve your roster and go get a guy who you know can be your number 1 and who you know you can give the ball to in game 1 of a postseason series and feel good about it. That is Corbin Burnes. And as intriguing as Singer could be with all that team control and still knowing, like, if the Orioles trade for Corbin Burnes, they're probably not going to re-sign him. I do not see John Angelo shelling out the money it's going to take to extend Corbin Burnes. If you go get him, I understand. You're giving up top prospects for just 1 year of a guy. It's just 2024, and that would be it. But they have a team that can win a World Series in 2024 with a few additions, and Corbin Burnes could be that number 1 addition that gets them there. So for me, that's the better option in a trade this offseason, especially because does Brady Singer have a higher upside than Dean Kramer and Cole Irvin and John Means at this point? Yeah, I do think so. But you still have younger guys like Kramer, like Rodriguez, like Bradish, like Chase McDermott coming up who you can still mold and you still have a lot of team control in that are kind of similar to Singer, whereas you don't have anything right now similar to Corbin Burnes. Yes, maybe Bradish and Rodriguez could become that, but right now you don't have anything close to that. That is what you need much more, even if it's just for a year. I go get Corbin Burnes if I had the choice. Fourth question of the day comes from Ali Khan on Twitter, who asks, how could changes in MLB front offices, specifically with the Marlins, with the White Sox, and with the Brewers this offseason, impact the Orioles' chances for trading for a starting pitcher with those teams? Really, really interesting question to kind of break down, how that could impact the O's. Now, for the Marlins, if you hadn't heard, Kim Ng basically declined her option, chose not to come back to the Marlins, and it was because she was hired as the first woman GM in Major League Baseball history, hired late in 2020. She takes this Marlins team back to the postseason this year, made some good deadline moves. She wasn't a perfect GM, made some bad moves in the past, but got this team to the postseason. And the Marlins congratulated her by not extending her and then trying to hire a president of baseball operations who would be above Ng. She didn't like that, obviously, and she basically stepped away from the team. So they don't have a GM right now, and they have an owner who doesn't want to spend. Then there's the White Sox, who kind of revamped their front office this offseason after just an absolutely disastrous 2023. And then you have the Brewers, who it looks like most likely their GM will still be intact, but they may not be bringing back Craig Counsell, who's a Milwaukee guy through and through, has been a great manager for them. They still never extended him. He wants more money. He seems to be the top choice for the Mets to be their manager, and there's a good chance Counsell is not back with the Brewers. So even though that's an on-field manager, not the general manager, that could start swaying things for the Brewers because, hey, Corbin Burnes is into his walk year. Brandon Woodruff was also going to be into his walk year. Then he got shoulder surgery, and it looks like Woodruff will miss all of 2024. So unless the Brewers re-sign him, he just might not pitch for the Brewers again and become a free agent. And so they're in kind of a tough spot even after winning the division, where I could see them selling off more pieces if they let Counsell walk and do maybe a little bit of a retool. So all those things could impact the Orioles. For the Marlins, with Kim Ng out, the Marlins have a past of having some success and then completely tearing it down. Remember, they won the World Series in 97, somewhat tore it down. They won the World Series in 03 and then completely tore it down right after that. Now, this is just they made the wild card and got swept out of the wild card round, not nearly going and winning the World Series. But without a GM, looking for new people, an owner who people clearly don't want to work with, it seems, and who doesn't want to spend money, they could tear it down again. And some of that tearing it down could be, hey, we're also without Sandy Alcantara. Our Cy Young winner is going to get Tommy John. He's going to miss all of 2024. Do they start to trade away from some of that pitching, look for better hitting prospects that they need? We've always talked about how the Marlins and Orioles seem like those perfect trade partners. Could a guy like Edward Cabrera or Trevor Rogers end up in an O's uniform? Maybe it's more possible now with Kim Ng out because she was certainly on board with trying to win now in Miami. And the new person picked by Bruce Sherman, their owner, maybe won't feel the same way. White Sox, it's such a disaster that you could see them truly starting to sell guys off. And Dylan Cease, I feel like, would be that first guy. Ace-type guy, is coming off of a down year, but still would command a lot, would get them good prospects, and he's got 2 years of control left. Probably even more so that they try to deal him now that there's new management in there. And again, I kind of explained the Brewers thing with Counsell potentially being out. So yeah, I certainly think there's an impact there. And I think the impact honestly kind of could be positive for the Orioles because it could mean that all three teams are more likely to trade away from those players. And I will say Chicago, Miami, and Milwaukee all need good high-level hitting prospects, specifically hitting prospects. That is what the Orioles have to offer in these trades. But two more mailbag questions to get to here on this episode before we go. One about what the Orioles payroll could look like in 2024. Will it get any higher, at least significantly? And then a little bit about Orioles trading away from their major league roster. Are there guys currently on the roster who they could trade away as they try to cut spending while adding it potentially this offseason? But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Sleeper. Now, the Orioles aren't in the playoffs anymore, but the MLB playoffs are here, and we're getting close to the World Series, and that means the clock is ticking on your chance to multiply your money by 100 times on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball's never been more exciting than it is now, with studs like Acuna, Betts, Ohtani, and Gunnar Henderson. You just pick more or less on the stats for these stars, like homers, strikeouts, and more, for up to a 100 times payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big. Now, Sleeper also has an app as well, which makes it super easy to make your picks. And I love the Sleeper app because not only is it easy, but it's fast. You go on there, you pick the players, you pick the stats. You can basically make your entries in under a minute. It is that simple. So use promo code LOCKEDON, and you can also get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Check out Sleeper today. So we're finishing up here on a mailbag episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Two more mailbag questions to get to. The first one comes from Texas Orioles on Twitter, who asks, what would you guess the Orioles 2024 payroll will be, and where would that rank among other payrolls in Major League Baseball? Now, we know the Orioles' opening day payroll in 2023 was right around $61 million. That was 29th in baseball. Only the lowly Oakland Athletics, who were trying as hard as we've ever seen any team try to lose games in 2023, had a lower payroll than the Orioles on opening day. Now, FanGraphs roster resource right now, with arbitration raises, projects the Orioles to have a $74 million payroll on opening day. Now, that, of course, is without any free agents, any trades, any outside additions. That is just with the players who are on the roster getting arbitration raises. They think $74 million. So if you add in at least another starting pitcher at around $10 million in free agency, at least one relief pitcher at about $5 million, and then hopefully $10 more million, whether it's a traded for starter, whether it's another reliever, possibly a utility guy. They're going to need another veteran piece like that. All that is about $25 more million. Let's just round it up to $26 more million and say my projection is right around $100 million for the Orioles payroll next year. And that would be the first time they've hit $100 million since they started the rebuild, which would be a nice step forward. And $100 million sounds nice. It's like, oh, you hit, that next echelon of figures into the 100 millions. Good job. That sounds like a much better payroll. But when you compare it to payrolls on opening day in 2023, if the Orioles had a $100 million opening day payroll in 2023, it would have ranked 23rd in baseball, right behind the Washington Nationals. Again, they were 29th this year, so it would have been a little step up, but $100 million is only 23rd in Major League Baseball. It really puts it into perspective how little the Orioles are spending and how much teams are spending to win games. Again, $100 million. That would have been, back in the late 90s, the number one payroll in baseball. Now it's 23rd. You got to spend to keep up. I think the Orioles will increase it, but even to get to $100 million, I just laid it out, that's a 5-ish starting pitcher, maybe a trade starting pitcher, and a reliever, like a middle reliever. That gets you to $100 million. It feels like they got to do more than that, right, to make this team better. But here we are with John Angelos. And the sixth and final question I'll answer today on this Mailbag Monday edition comes from Brady on Twitter, who asks, do you think the Orioles trade any of these four players? Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes, Anthony Santander, and Ryan Mountcastle. It's an interesting question because as, better hitting prospects come up for the Orioles, these questions continue to be asked about, will the Orioles hold on to all of these somewhat holdover guys who have been through a little more of the rebuild before getting to the big leagues? Now, I'll rank these guys from 1 to 4 from most likely to least likely to be traded away by the Orioles this offseason. I'd say number 1, most likely, is Anthony Santander. I don't think the Orioles should trade him. He's too important a piece of the middle of their order. But he's in his final year, right? He'll be a free agent after 2024. And he's into his final year of arbitration, and he's going to be due, according to MLB trade rumors and their projections, about $12 to $13 million in 2024. That shouldn't be a lot for a lot of baseball teams, but that would theoretically make him the highest paid player on the 2024 Orioles. And with Santander, although he provides a lot with the bat, not as much with the defense, and in general, like he's not the most valuable player on this team, if the Orioles really are, like John Angelos unfortunately says, going to operate like the Rays and the Guardians and the Brewers and teams like that, those teams would probably trade Anthony Santander this offseason because although he's valuable, they see, the guys like Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad potentially ready to step in and fill his role and be younger and cheaper and maybe better, but also very much maybe not. But cheaper is the right word there. And they say, well, we're not extending these guys anyway. We're not going to re-sign him after 24, so might as well get something for him before he walks. I wouldn't do it. I think it's a really bad idea, but that's why he's number one on the list. Number two, I would put Austin Hayes. He could kind of end up in no man's land. It's back-to-back years of a great first half, a struggling second half. Yes, he was better defensively this year, Gold Glove finalist in left field, giving him more value to this team. He has 2 more years. He's not a free agent until after 2025, so, maybe the Orioles better chance of holding on to him. He could be packaged in a deal to get pitching, right? A team that wants like a solid starting outfielder. But Austin Hayes also, because he finishes the seasons poorly and he's kind of injury prone, not the super highest trade value. Also because he's not like a true center fielder, still more of a corner guy, not the highest trade value in the world. I just think it's worth it for the O's to hold on to Austin Hayes. Does he maybe end up in a platoon with Cowser or Kjerstad at some point? Maybe, but I think he's still valuable to the Orioles. More valuable to the O's than any other team, and they're going to hold on to him, I think. But because he's kind of in roster limbo maybe soon, that's why he's number 2 on the list. Number 3 would be Cedric Mullins. I would not trade Mullins, even after kind of a down year. I think all the struggles late in the year after he returned from that second groin injury, he just was not healthy, it looked like, and that's why he was kind of a disaster down the stretch with the bat. I think he'll bounce back when healthy next year. I would honestly extend Mullins. It's really hard to find a center fielder that good on defense who can steal bases and can hit like Mullins can when he's right. I would extend him to play center field, but I guess if a team really liked him and really wanted Mullins in exchange for a legitimate starting pitcher, the Orioles could do it this offseason. And then number 4 would be Ryan Mountcastle, only because he's a first base only right-handed hitter. Those guys generally don't have a lot of trade value at all, even though he has multiple years of team control left. He's just not a super valuable player to trade away. And also, despite the roller coaster that he's had, when he came back from vertigo this year, he had the best stretch offensively of his career. He was that good. And I know that O'Hearn's here and I know that Mayo's coming and Kjerstad's coming and whatever. But if Ryan Mountcastle's producing like he did at the end of this year, he is super valuable to this team. Not a lot of trade value. That's what puts him at number 4 on my list. But again, thank you all so much for submitting your mailbag questions. Again, send them on Twitter at LockedOnOrioles. Email us, lockedOnOrioles@gmail.com, or put them in the comments right here for future mailbag episodes. Again, a lot of the Mondays throughout the offseason, it'll be a Mailbag Monday show, so we'll continue to answer your questions. Now, speaking of Locked On Orioles on YouTube, thank you all so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing to the YouTube channel. We are well over 5,000 subscribers now. That is all thanks to you with this magical Orioles season. No, it didn't end the way we wanted, but it's still been great, and we'll still be here with you on the YouTube channel with all this content throughout the offseason. But I promise when we got to 5,000 subscribers, we'd do a giveaway like we've done for every 1,000 subscribers. And I had to delay it a little because we got to 5,000 right as the playoffs started, so it's focused a little bit on that. But now we will do a giveaway. And I know I've given away an Orioles Hawaiian shirt before, but I've got another one here. It's a size XL Orioles Hawaiian shirt, and this is going to be the giveaway. Now, 2 things you need to do to be entered to win the Orioles Hawaiian shirt. Number 1, you have to subscribe to the Locked On Orioles podcast on YouTube. So go do that right now. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And number 2, leave in the comments on today's YouTube video or any of the videos for the rest of this week here on this channel. I want you to leave a comment of what your favorite home run was from this 2023 Orioles season. It can be any homer that was hit all year. Tell me your favorite Orioles home run and why. And if you do, you will be entered to win the Orioles Hawaiian shirt. You'll be able to put your answer in the comments of this video and the videos later this week. The entries will close at midnight on Friday night. I will draw the winner this weekend. And then on next Monday's episode, make sure to come back and join us for that one. It will be a mailbag, and I will also reveal the winner of the Orioles Hawaiian shirt. So again, step 1, subscribe to Locked On Orioles on YouTube. Step 2, leave in the comments of this video your favorite Orioles home run that was hit in 2023 and why, and you will be entered to win as a thank you for getting me over 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. One more thing before we go, going to take a little bit of a just mini break from the podcast this week, just because we're officially into the offseason with the Orioles being done, but not quite the full offseason, right, where it's like trade time and free agent time. It's kind of this in-between time where the O's are just kind of waiting for the World Series to end. So I'm going to take a little bit of time off because of that as well. So no episode coming up tomorrow. I will be back, though, later in the week with more Orioles offseason content, so stay tuned for that. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.